Helen never imagined she'd spend her 60th birthday scrubbing secondhand tile grout in a house barely the size of her old living room. Yet here she was, on her knees in faded jeans and an old college sweatshirt, toothbrush in hand, scrubbing like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. This house, tiny, creaky and kissed by mildew, was hers. Really hers. After decades of building a life for a man who vanished the moment her hair grayed and her skin softened, she finally had something no one could take away. It was her name etched on the deed, hers alone. Not shared. Not his.
2 years earlier, Helen had come home from the grocery store with a carton of eggs, a bouquet of pale lilies, and a heart still tethered to a man she believed would grow old beside her. She remembered that day with disturbing clarity, not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because of how ordinary it all was. The way the light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes on the hardwood floor. The way the plastic bag handles dug into her fingers as she juggled them through the door. The familiar hum of the refrigerator motor. There had been a roast defrosting in the fridge. A bottle of wine chilling in the door. She had even picked up his favorite mustard. The expensive kind he always forgot to put on the list. She was planning to surprise him with dinner and a quiet evening, maybe even a movie if he didn't fall asleep early again. She walked into the kitchen, set the bags down, and caught sight of the note. At first, she thought it was a receipt. Then a list. Then a joke? Her heart skipped. The handwriting was his, unmistakably so. Slanted and careless, with the same crooked H she'd seen on birthday cards and grocery scribbles for nearly 3 decades.
Helen, I've met someone. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but I can't keep living a lie. Her name is Mia. She's good to me. Please try to understand. I'll be staying with her for now.
Her knees buckled before she realized they had. The edge of the counter caught her hip, but she barely felt it. The lilies dropped to the floor, petals scattering like a delicate explosion. She stood there, staring at the note, trying to make sense of something that already made too much. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the finality. The absence of her name at the end. No apology. No affection. No fight left to give. No signature. Just Mia.
Mia was 34. A yoga instructor with sun-streaked hair and eyes too large for sincerity. She had once complimented Helen's calm energy at a dinner party, in that breathy, faux spiritual tone people use when they're already making up their minds about you. Helen had smiled and nodded and offered her another glass of wine. And apparently, that was enough to begin the end of everything. Helen crumpled the note in her palm but couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Instead, she unfolded it, again and again, rereading it like it might suddenly change, like it might end with "I'll be back in time for dinner." But it never did. She called his phone. Straight to voicemail. She texted, "Is this a joke? Where are you?" No reply. By the time the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the kitchen in amber and shadows, she had only received one message. It was a bank notification. $24,879.65 withdrawn from their joint savings account. Gone. Not just him. Not just the note. Not just the love she had built her world around. Everything. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation and disbelief. She stood in the bank lobby, her hands trembling as she spoke with a man half her age who looked at her with the kind of pity reserved for widows and abandoned pets. He had access, the young man said, almost apologetically. Legally, it's within his rights. Helen nodded slowly. She wanted to scream. She wanted to curl into herself and vanish. Instead, she smiled, a brittle, practiced smile, and walked out with the last $382 in their checking account and a sense that her life had turned to ash overnight. When she got home that night, she walked through each room like she was trespassing. The living room still smelled like his cologne. His shoes were still by the door. His toothbrush still in the cup beside hers. The betrayal wasn't just in his leaving, it was in the quiet way he had gone about it. No argument. No warning. No chance for her to fight or plead or even rage. He had made the decision long before he left the note. And she had been too busy being calm energy to see it. That night, Helen sat on the bathroom floor in her nightgown, knees drawn to her chest, and wept into a towel like it might swallow her whole. Not for him. Not even for the marriage. But for the years she had given away like pennies, small, insignificant, unnoticed, until one day she had nothing left. Helen stopped answering calls from mutual friends. She didn't know what to tell them about her ex-husband. When one friend, Karen, offered to take her out for a healing lunch, she declined, not wanting to hear whispers about how he could leave her or if she had done something wrong. The house went up for sale, his house, as she now thought of it. The one she'd helped paint, helped decorate, helped turn into a home, now emptied like a tomb. The divorce settlement left her with next to nothing. The lawyer said it could have been worse. Worse? Worse than 30 years of devotion being reduced to alimony and a packing list? She sold her rings. All of them. Even the anniversary diamond he gave her in Santa Fe. It helped pay off a credit card. And still, somehow, Helen found herself standing in a rental with beige walls and a leaky sink, watching the rain trickle down the window like tears. That's where the real silence began. Not just the absence of his voice, but the echo of her own. A woman who had given so much, and didn't even know what she liked anymore. Helen took a job at the local library, not glamorous, but stable. She shelved books with aching knees and helped schoolchildren find stories about dragons and dogs and faraway lands she'd never dared to visit. She walked to work, packed her lunch, and counted every cent. For 19 months, she saved. When she finally signed the paperwork on the tiny house, a 2-room cottage on the edge of a sleepy town, it felt surreal. There were dandelions in the cracked driveway and a rusted faucet in the kitchen. The paint peeled like a sunburn. But it was hers. She stood in the empty living room that first night with her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug and whispered aloud, "I did it." The silence that followed was not lonely. It was sacred. But sacred silence wears thin after a while. Especially when there's no one to talk to but the kettle and the dog next door, who barked at shadows. Helen's son, Josh, lived 3 states away. He called often, with affection, but never on time. He had a new baby, a busy job, and a kind wife who always asked how Helen was doing, but they couldn't see the way she lingered at the window when their car drove off after the holidays. Couldn't hear the echo of her footsteps in a house made only for one. Helen had never made friends. Not real ones. She'd given everything to her marriage, the vacations, the hobbies, the girls' nights she turned down to keep dinner warm. And now, she had no one to call for a cup of coffee. No one would notice if she didn't show up at the library tomorrow. It happened on a Tuesday. Helen was sweeping her tiny porch, humming without realizing it, when a voice floated over the short picket fence. "You always hum the same tune." She looked up, startled. A woman stood at the edge of the walkway, tall, with windblown silver hair in a loose braid, wearing a denim jacket over a flowing skirt. Her smile was unbothered, easy. "I'm sorry?" Helen blinked. The woman stepped forward. "You hum when you sweep." "I pass here most mornings, and every time I hear it. Something soft and sad. It sticks in my head all day." Helen flushed. "Oh, I didn't know anyone could hear me." "It's lovely," the woman said. "Sounds like home." "I'm Marjorie. But no one calls me that except my dentist. My friends call me Joe." Helen hesitated, then reached for the offered hand. "Helen." Joe's grip was warm and firm. There was something about her presence, grounded, but not heavy. Like she'd seen plenty of storms and decided not to get blown away by them. "I live over on Maple," Joe added, nodding toward the trees. "You've got the nicest porch in the neighborhood. Mind if I stop by again sometime?" Helen surprised herself by saying, "I'd like that." Joe came back that Friday. Then again the following week. And after that, she just started showing up with a knock and a smile, sometimes with fresh muffins, sometimes with tulips wrapped in brown paper. At first, it was just porch conversations, Joe talking, Helen mostly listening. But Joe had a way of pulling people in without pressuring them. She didn't ask invasive questions. She simply noticed. "You like things quiet," she'd say, sipping tea. "Me too. I just talk more to fill the space." Helen liked that about her. Joe had an open laugh, the kind that made you want to earn it. She'd been widowed for 5 years, and while the pain still showed in certain silences, she didn't wear it like a badge. Instead, she told stories. About hiking alone in Vermont. About a gallery exhibit in Montreal where she stood and wept in front of a sculpture for 10 minutes. About loving a man who had been both the best and hardest part of her life. Joe was bold in the ways Helen wasn't, spontaneous, opinionated, curious. Yet she also knew when to be still. When to let the quiet linger without trying to fill it. Helen found herself looking forward to her visits. With Joe, there was no pretense. No pressure to perform or pretend. And for the first time in years, Helen laughed freely. Not the polite kind. Real, belly-deep laughter that left her breathless. One crisp afternoon, Joe stretched her legs out and said, "You know, you should come with me sometime." "To the market?" Helen asked. "No, somewhere further. Italy, maybe. Or Spain." Helen blinked. "I don't travel." Joe smiled. "That's what you think. I wouldn't know what to pack. I panic in airports. And I've never eaten alone at a restaurant, let alone in another country." Joe tilted her head. "You've done harder things than catching a flight. You started over from scratch. You built this little life with your own hands. That takes guts." Helen lowered her eyes. "I don't feel brave." "Well," Joe said, pouring more tea, "sometimes courage looks like opening the door when someone knocks. But we'll start small. A day trip. Something close." They called it their training wheels trip. Just one town over, a sleepy coastal village with clapboard shops and wild roses growing along the roads. But for Helen, it might as well have been a foreign country. She spent the week before packing and repacking her tote bag. Checking bus times. Writing addresses on an index card in neat block letters. Joe met her at the stop wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses that made her look half movie star, half mischief. They rode quietly for a while, Joe staring out the window, Helen wringing her hands. "You okay?" Joe asked. Helen nodded. "Just nervous." "Nervous is fine," Joe said. "It means you care about the life you're building." The town smelled like salt and lavender. They wandered into antique shops, lingered by the harbor, and split a slice of rhubarb pie at a seaside diner where Joe flirted harmlessly with the waiter. "You're shameless," Helen laughed, cheeks pink. "I've earned it," Joe replied with a wink. "When you stop caring what people think, you get a whole lot freer." At a dusty old bookshop, Helen picked up a slim poetry collection and almost put it back, then bought it without saying a word. A small rebellion. A declaration. On the way home, Joe dozed against the window while Helen watched the coastline pass. Her eyes filled, quietly. She wasn't healed. Not yet. But she wasn't afraid anymore either. One morning, Helen received a letter. From her ex-husband. It was short. He apologized. Said Mia had left him. Said he was sorry for everything. Asked if they could talk. Helen sat with it for hours. The old Helen might have jumped at the chance, for closure, for kindness, for the familiar. But this Helen, this woman who had scrubbed her own floors and paid her own mortgage and made a friend who knew how to laugh through pain, this Helen knew the difference between forgiveness and reopening wounds. She tossed the letter into the fireplace. And let it burn. In spring, Joe said, "I'm going to Ireland. Come with me." Helen stared at the teacup in her hands. Her fingers trembled. "I don't know." Joe leaned in. "You dreamed of traveling. You told me so. What are you waiting for? Helen shook her head. I'm afraid. Joe smiled gently. Then we go afraid. Ireland was everything. Misty cliffs. Laughter in pubs. Kind strangers and winding roads. Helen's fear melted day by day. She hiked trails she never thought her knees could handle. She journaled in sunlit cafes. She mailed a postcard to her son that simply said, I'm okay. I'm more than okay. She and Joe shared secrets under starlight. Talked about the men they lost and the women they became. On their final night, Helen stood by the sea, wind tangling her hair, and whispered into the dark. I forgive you. And I forgive me, too. Back in her little house, Helen didn't feel lonely anymore. She joined a local travel club. Helped at the library with children's reading hour. Took long walks. Kept her porch swept. Joe visited often. They planned their next trip. Maybe Greece. Maybe Japan. Helen still missed some things, her son, her youth, the fantasy of the life she thought she had. But what she had now was real. A small home. A true friend. A brave heart. And finally, a life that felt like it belonged to her.